My name is John Santaferraro, and this is The Digital Analyst, where AI makes sense and digital dominance begins.
The Digital Analyst with John Santaferraro, powered by Insight Jam.
While the whole world is enamored with the agentic AI revolution and the future, I decided to take a look at a long history of deep blue. I find that the best way to understand what is going on today is to better understand from where we have come. Did you know that IBM began their research in AI all the way back in the 1950s? It was in 1997 that IBM's Deep Blue beat world champion chess player Garry Kasparov. IBM Watson was released in 2004. Apple released Siri in 2011. While generative AI has taken the world by storm and organizations are already seeing a significant lift in productivity and a return on their investments, there are still many projects failing, floundering, or falling short of return on investment. We hear the stories of those moving forward at a rapid pace, but we fail to remember the high percentage of laggards that have barely put their feet in the AI waters. At the same time, the second AI wave has hit the shore, and we are seeing AI agents begin to proliferate. Everything from research to applications, everything from previous generation automations to next generation autonomy, everything from tasks to roles formerly filled by humans. We have good news. Our guest today is a man who has spent his entire career moving things forward at unprecedented speeds and growing whatever he touches. Bruno Aziza joins us to talk about Deep Blue, deep learning, and the future of AI. Bruno is the IBM Group VP for Business Intelligence and AI. His accomplishments are far too many to list. He helped launch 4 startups, 2 of which eventually were acquired, 1 to IPO and another merger. He has played major executive roles and transformational positions for Microsoft, Oracle, and Google. He has worked on both the vendor side and the venture capital side. Bruno is the host of the CarCast podcast with more than 200 episodes and 300,000 followers across all platforms. I don't know what else to say except Bruno is one person I would want on my side, whatever I am doing. So grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and join me on my Tuscan farm in the hills between Florence and Lucca for the Digital Analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the man, the myth, the legend, Bruno Aziza. Bruno, a big digital welcome to the Digital Analyst.
Well, thanks for the great introduction, John. It's so great to spend time with you today.
I've never done that for anybody, but I had to do it for you because you are a legend, at least in my mind. So that's enough, right?
Thanks for saying that. And you have been an inspiration for me for so many years. I remember when we first met. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm really honored to be on your show here.
So glad you're here. It was 14 years ago that you and I recorded our first video podcast together when you were at Microsoft and I was at HP. And believe it or not, we have a clip from that episode of businessintelligence.tv. Hit it, Ryan.
Hi, I'm Bruno Aziza, and today I'm sitting down with John Santaferraro. He is the HP Business Intelligence Evangelist, and he runs into a lot of enterprise examples, not just from a delivery standpoint, but for how they organize themselves to win with business intelligence. So John, welcome to the segment.
Great to be here, Bruno. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit about how you should think about enterprise and specifically the example of organizations that are winning with BI across the enterprise.
Well, it's really interesting. We're seeing a trend where companies that 4 or 5 years ago
We don't have
started
time to
doing-
play the whole thing, Bruno, but what a great memory.
Oh my gosh. Well, you haven't changed, and I think most people will notice that my hair's gone. But that's primarily because I'm taking inspiration from you. I'm trying to be more like John.
Well, I love it. I got to ask you. It's like you had a great run at Microsoft. You've done startups. You've been at Google, Mike, Oracle. Excuse me, I forgot Oracle. And now a move to IBM. And my guess is that the world was your oyster, and you could have gone anywhere. So what made you decide on a move to IBM?
Well, thanks for saying that, John. It's really nice. And you're right. I had a great run at Google Cloud, over 3 years. We became the top 5 enterprise software company with adoption from 60% of the world's organization, practically starting from scratch, helping scale Google Cloud. My products were BigQuery and Looker and Data Studio and Dataplex. The last year at Google, I also was a senior partner at Capital G, so it's Alphabet's investment fund, and we invest in companies like Databricks and Dataiku. And so, absolutely incredible company to work for, and incredible companies to work with. For me, a decision to choose IBM is really the factor of kind of what I've learned in the tech industry for the last 25 years is you choose based on a few factors. The first one was the people. You and I have had a relation for a very long time, and we spend a lot of our times working with people during the day, and so I think it's an important factor when choosing your next adventure. And for me, rejoining talented colleagues like Radhika Gunnar, who I worked with at Google, when I met Arvin, the CEO of IBM, really connected with him on his vision as well on what he thinks the next 10 years are going to be in this field. So I was really inspired by that. So I think that was the first factor. The second is my perspective on the market, and I know we'll get to talk about this, is that I do think that IBM is really well positioned for the challenge of the next decades in data, AI, and analytics. I think we're entering a really new era in this industry. And so I'm really passionate about helping enterprises, kind of like what we talked about when we first met 14 years ago. It's really my focus. I mean, since I started the last 7 months, I've been really focused on meeting as many customers as I can. I think if I count to over 150 to really understand what they're doing. So I think the incentive alignment between IBM and the CIOs and executives when it comes to the generative AI data and analytics opportunities, I think is really important and is really going to be a key differentiator. And then finally, just the DNA of IBM is actually very similar to Google, huge research arm, trying to look around the corner and predict. I mean, some of the work that we're doing with quantum and cybersecurity I think is going to be also very important. And so these 3 factors for me, led to this opportunity. I have now the honor of, leading a very large team of product leaders across data, AI, and analytics and the software business. Very experienced, very motivated, great output. I mean, I think you saw at our latest conference, I think when you looked at the page on day 2, we had over 500 news items. We launched 19 new products, and also the customers. The customers I get to spend time with are really quite incredible. Last weekend I was with the UFC. The week before I was with NatWest. Spent time with Lockheed Martin. So these are leaders in their industry, shaping the next decade. I know we might get to talk about Heineken and PepsiCo today. So I'm really excited about the opportunity because for me, what motivates me is helping these customers, learning from their deployment, innovating in the space. And IBM, I think, over the next few decades here is going to be a huge driver of innovation. So I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, this does seem like it's the right company for you at the right time. And I say right time because you and I have been around for decades and we've seen shifts in the market. We saw a big surge around data warehousing and business intelligence. We saw the internet change the world. We waded through the deep seas of big data. And now we're just entering the age of AI. We're I think at the beginning of it, but it's moving incredibly fast. And I heard you say that something is different about this shift in the market. And it could be potentially even more disruptive and more transformational than these major shifts that we've seen in the past. So from your perspective, what do you think is different this time around?
I think it was Bill Gates that said we're really bad at predicting the long-term future and really bad at understanding the short term. So I think there's a lot of excitement. I think you said it right, which is AI and Gen AI is new for the mass market. Many of us have been working on it for decades, but now the acceleration is a little different than what we experienced before. People compare this phase of the industry to the invention of the internet or maybe cloud, and I think it's more like the invention of the car. It's really, if you can project yourself to what must it have felt like when the entire economy was running on horses, and now all of a sudden we have the car. It's fascinating, it's incredibly accelerating, and it's also a little scary. And so I think while you think technology like cloud and the internet took over 10 years to materialize, really, this one, the acceleration is going to be, I think, a little bit more drastic. It's also a great opportunity. We'll talk about agent, but it's a great opportunity to connect how the agentic AI is in fact now the killer app for the unstructured information. We've been talking about how a large portion, over 80% of the data is unstructured. And now we have this new opportunity to bring that to life. 99% of the data is untouched by Gen AI. We expect over 1 billion applications to be built over the next few years. A third of them are going to be agent. And so there's just a lot of acceleration that's quite different from what I think the last two innovations in the field have been. We also see that, frankly, the old playbook is not really working, right? I mean, if you look at the results in the market so far, only 16% of organizations have adopted at the enterprise level, enterprise scale level, Gen AI. 1 in 4 organizations only is getting ROI. Gartner expects that 40% of the agentic AI projects will be canceled because of cost and really unclear business value. So we're going to need a little bit more maturity, maybe a little bit more experience, examples from organizations that have succeeded at a very large scale in serious business critical use cases. So it's a little different in the sense that the acceleration is different. I think the technology impact is different. And also the way we are going to need to approach it is going to be different.
Yeah, I'll throw in there too. I think the investment that is coming into the technology at this point is also coming in faster at higher levels than anything I've seen in the past. And the other thing that I think is different this time around is the potential impact on the workforce. I've heard the statistic that 60% of the jobs today that are in existence weren't in existence in 1940. That's a long stretch. I think we're going to have that same figure in 10 years from now. 60% of the jobs it's possible that we have today won't be in existence 10 years from now. So there's that impact on the workforce as well. This is definitely going to be different than anything, and it already is different than anything we've seen in the past.
It's really tough to predict because, again, if you go back to the analogy of the invention of the car created a very large amount of new opportunities, jobs, and professions that we couldn't imagine when we had horses, right? And so when I look at the customers I get to spend time with, in fact, what we're seeing is the expansion of productivity, value. You take the example of a NatWest, for instance, right? They built this incredible Gen AI application. 11 million customer queries. 94% of their customers are using it for digital banking. They get a boost of 150% in customer satisfaction. It's creating a ton of opportunity for them. I look at Heineken, 400 million consumers, 1 million customers every day. Ronald, their chief digital and technology officer, talks about how he's taking 100,000 data elements to unlock data. You look at PepsiCo. And so I think the real picture of the folks that are succeeding here are really unlocking new demand, and they're able to touch it in ways that they might not have been able to do it, today. And so I think it is actually creating more opportunities than the opposite.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day.
Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, Next Thing.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads. And contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and yet I still think that we are at the beginning. When I look at most of the generative AI and even the agentic AI use cases, it seems like we're still at that inflection point where we're doing things sort of the way they have always been in a slightly different way. But what hasn't arisen yet is the incredible innovation that we can expect. New business models, new ecosystems, that is yet to come. And yet every time there's a major shift in technology, that's how it starts. You do what was done, you do it a little better or different, and then the innovation comes. So generative AI, it's the same thing. It began by taking old data and making things like it, generating things like what was in the data, content, images, videos, music, software code, anything that exists digitally. However, as things begin to shift and these large language models begin to shift to small language models, we're starting to see more strategic analysis, different innovation in different ways. What shifts are you seeing in the market, and how do these shifts impact the way that we use AI?
I love the way you set it up because I think it's beyond the technology. I think it's about strategic alignment. The organizations I get to spend time with, the way they're harnessing this new trend is they've really made a strategic alignment that's different from what they might have done in the past with the companies that decide to partner. If you think about the opportunity that you have ahead of you, you have essentially three ways of taking advantage of it. The first one is you're deciding that you're going to make a single cloud bet, and you're going to decide that you're going to build your agents and build the future of your organization, its processes on one cloud because you have affinity with that cloud, or maybe you have existing contracts with them. And that strategy sounds good on paper. The only problem is, you must have a majority of your data into that cloud. And we know that most enterprises are in fact multi-cloud, often, hybrid, by necessity, by the result of their business and so forth. So single cloud strategy can create silos, it can reduce the flexibility, it can lock you into someone else's roadmap. And so that might not always work. The second, playbook that we've noticed is people that are looking at the application stack and they're saying, look, I'm partnering with this application vendor and they know my business processes, they have my data, and I might as well build agents on top of that. And so that's reasonable. The only problem is if you look at the job of any of your information workers, well, it spans across 10 or 15 different applications. So here you might be challenged as well because you're going to need integration across these applications. But if you're going through the application silo, you might not get it. And so the third playbook is this horizontal strategy, which we increasingly see organizations to gravitate towards, because the reality is that, well, their data is going to be everywhere, not on just one cloud or multiple clouds. Some of it's going to stay on premise. Some of it actually might go on premise for financial reasons. If you're building your own models, if you want to secure your models, if you have sovereignty challenges, you might choose some on-prem strategy. But in general, you're going to live in what I call a multi-world, right? Multi-cloud, multimodal, like you just talked about, right? Multiple types of form factors, documents, images, and so forth. And so it's the ability to build a strategy that's highly flexible, that goes from a vertical integration preference to a horizontal integration, that I think is going to lead to some of the results that we see. I mean, I think about companies like PepsiCo, 1.4 billion customers, 320,000 employees, 200% increase in customer loyalty. Their environment is 60 petabytes. It's growing twice year over year. And they're rationalizing these 8 data lakes that they know of. Actually, he jokes about that. He's like, there might be more data lakes. They've got 27,000 reports, and they're now transforming that into what he calls 50 AI powered consoles. And so I think you'll notice the transformation of these leaders where they're realizing what we might have done in the past might not work. It's kind of this adage of, what got us here might not get us there type of thing. And so the
Absolutely.
earlier you realize that, I think the earlier you're going to be able to harness the next wave and then be a leader there rather than a follower.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball because I know that one of your favorite topics to discuss is leadership styles.
Sure.
And you've become, I think, in a lot of ways, a model leader for a lot of people in terms of how to lead large teams of people. I read a book by Jeff Woods, The AI-Driven Leader, and it completely changed my view on Gen AI from the perspective of how does an executive use AI? And his idea is that the AI becomes your thought partner as an executive. It's not the company now, it's the actual executive. And so he inspired me to put together a whole set of different personas that AI can play for the executive as a co-executive, running decisions by the AI as a strategist, letting them identify gaps and surface new opportunities in your strategy, communication coach, making sure you are communicating to the board in a way that is convincing based on who each person is, making decisions, analyzing projects, managing time, and a kind of an executive coach, right? A buddy. I mean, I wish when I had been an executive that I had a really smart person that could kind of hang out with me and come around with me that maybe knew more than I did and could help me. And that can become that for an executive. What are your thoughts on AI for the leader?
Well, I took a note of this book. I love to read books, so I'm definitely going to check this out. I think you're right. How exciting, to be in this part of our industry where you have access to so much more. I think there's a few things I think about. The first one is, you're making the decision, right? So in the end, you have to use AI as a helper. My best analogy is that it's my Iron Man suit, right? And I like Iron Man as a character, but I really think about it that way, which is it's my ability to accelerate my thinking. There's no longer this idea of you start with a blank page. You are able to kind of brainstorm and, well, I wonder what this person said about that. I wonder how I should think about this and so forth. There's also an interesting use case, that's really developing. I think that's not being talked about a lot is um, there's a lot of people that, will not confess that they don't know certain things to other humans, but they might do it um, to their agents. And so as long as you get the proper setting, the one thing I did take off in some of the agents that I use is I turn off memory because I don't want it to be used overly, to my detriment. But I do think the interaction paradigm is changing. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think you probably know from my Substack blog. I wrote this leadership manual. Essentially, if you think about all the objects that we use, all the products that we use, they all have a user guide. But we humans, the most complex system in the planet, we rarely have written a user guide about ourselves. And so I wrote over the last 25 years, getting feedback from people I worked with, this very long document. It's 30 pages on how to use Bruno essentially as a product. And my teammates love it. Well, I built a GPT on top of it. So now you don't have to
Of
read the book.
course.
You can use a GPT for it. I even went as far as doing the same thing with my kids. I have two kids, and every year I write them a letter. And a few years ago, I kind of went a little bit further than the letter. I probably wrote a 30, 40-page book. And I realized, when you have two kids, they're not going to read the book. And so I created what I called the Dad GPT, which is the GPT they can use if they can't get a hold of me. And it will kind of source from this book I've written them over the years. My point there is that I think we are in an era where we have extremely powerful new interfaces that we absolutely are going to have to harness on a daily basis, just like you use your email. And at the same time, we also have to remember it's the human that is responsible and accountable. And so you got to be careful how far you're using these tools and stay, true to what we do best. Imagine, make decisions based on ethical and moral reasons and so forth. Not everything is binary, right? Most of our
Yeah.
lives is in the gray area, and so we got to make sure we stay true to that.
Yeah, no, I love that because the worst thing that we could do is become dependent on the AI. And when we
Yeah.
do, we get reduced to the lowest common denominator because now we're just like everybody else. And we
Yeah.
retain that position of the creative, of the strategic, of the real thought that goes into something. And AI remains as a critic or a coach or an assistant. It has to stay that way. I never want to be reduced to the lowest common denominator. That's not a part of my MO either, Bruno. So I love
We're
that.
all
Eh,
unique. We're all
Yeah.
unique.
Yes. What other practical advice? You've got listeners out there right now that I think most people are overwhelmed with the speed at which AI is going, the new types of AI that are being introduced, the number of new companies that are spawning. It's like it's crazy. It's as an industry analyst, it's impossible to keep up with everything that's going on. So, what kind of advice would you give leaders that in terms of AI, where do they invest? Where do they spend their time? What should they be doing? How do they accelerate value creation using AI? What's your practical advice?
The first thing that I would say is, step back and look at the opportunity in a long-term fashion. I think if you read the material of most vendors in the space, they're going to tell you that the future looks like a straight line. Your road to production and value for Gen AI is you first identify the use cases, then you test them, and then you run in production. How nice is that? The reality is that what we're observing, is 16% of organizations being in production at scale. It looks more like the hype cycle from Gartner, right? So we've had a lot of hope, and now we're going down, and we're wondering how we're going to get to the plateau of productivity. And so that's the first bit, is realizing it's not going to be a straight line. Now, the way you're going to get there is by connecting to people who have done it and kind of dissecting how they've done it. That's why, I've been so obsessed about spending time, as much time as I can, with customers, because I want to figure out the patterns. One company that really stuck with me is USA. Ramnick, there's their chief data and AI officer, talked about this idea of unstructured data as a first class asset. Now, the company's very mature, right? They got over 200 AI solutions in production. And when you dissect what they're doing, there are patterns. The first one is this idea that it's in fact not all about agents. While everyone's talking to you about building agents, what's going to matter is orchestrating those agents at scale. And so you got to really focus on that. And there's at least 5 capabilities you're going to need to develop. The first one is, it's not going to be about one agent. We know that, right? It's going to be about agents that maybe you've developed in one application stack, that you've developed maybe in one cloud stack, and maybe that your developers might have built using custom tools. So the multi-agent collaboration and communication coordination is a really important, I think, area to look at. The second area is, what I call the cross ecosystem integration, right? So now they're talking to each other, but what is the efficiency level at which they are working and integrating together? The last thing you want is holes in the process. So a unified orchestration across multiple applications, multiple clouds is important. Third is how your tools and rules are being managed in concert with these new agents. So I would really look into that. It's a concept I called agent minus. So this idea that the majority of your workflows are primarily going to be automated, right? We know that while everyone's talking about the agentic, probabilistic power, a lot of your company is already learning and running on automated deterministic process. So you don't want to replace those or destroy them if they're working. So the tools and rules working with agents and the management of that, I think, is going to be really important. Um, on top of that, you're going to need to make sure you have abilities to supervise and route and plan. So, from an architecture standpoint, it's really critical that you do that. And then finally, the operations, right? So it's not just the discovery, but it's the monitoring, the optimization, I think we know the cost of training. We might not be able to know the cost of inference. And so you're going to need to have to make a lot of decisions, a lot of trade-offs between cost and performance that could drastically affect your bottom line, but also how you look at cost versus value. And so these 5 components, I think you ought to whiteboard them, sit down with your team, and then figure out, okay, what's the game plan for that? A lot of what we see is there's been a lot of experimentation to date. The questions that customers are asking in production are really quite different, and they gravitate around cost performance trade-offs, security, governance by design. And I really intend to say by design, like you have to design around that, not use it as a second thought. The idea of governance, data quality being a thing you do after you've built your strategy, just we know doesn't work and is very expensive. And so I think we're entering an interesting era because, well, it's going to be about what are the enterprises that are doing this at scale in production are doing, and what can we learn from them? Because if we don't, we're going to be in the world of experimentation, very costly, and never get into production, and you might never reach this plateau of productivity.
Want more Insight Jam? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for shorts, panels, podcasts, and more. In your Shorts feed, enjoy a daily dose of best practices from tech experts and leading solution providers, while long-form panel discussions and keynotes, recorded live every quarter, go deep on important industry topics. And don't miss our collection of regular podcasts, keeping you informed on the latest trends. We're hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so subscribe to be notified of our next upload. Now, let's get back to the show.
To summarize, I think what you just said there, in almost every one of those steps, it's you really do have to walk before you run. And I like to recommend people, whether it's generative or agentic AI, think about task-based AI as a starting place.
Sure.
And it's where you've had data, it's where you've worked it with business processes before, and there's a baseline and a measurement, and you can know very quickly if things are being improved or not. And then you move up to the more persona-based kinds of things where you have AI that is mimicking a person in a role. And then you can begin to look at where you really do need the multi-agent interaction capability and operation into the work group kind of AI and ultimately into ecosystem use of different AI in places where it makes sense. But I'm not recommending to people like jump to multi-agent ecosystems and go try and do that. That would be insane.
I think it's right. And you've got to be really careful when you read the marketing material, that's floating out there on the internet. I think the first bit you have to ask yourself is, what is working today at the organization? I mean, I think about an organization like NatWest that we talked about earlier. When you look at a loan application, for instance, they really deconstructed the customer journey to understand where is it relevant to use those rules and tools, those automations that, in fact, are the moat of our business, by the way, right? Because these are not new organizations. They've been in business for a very long time. They've accumulated really strong knowledge, and they've got really good efficiency. So you want to optimize that. And then you want to then look at what is it that you can add to that as an agentic opportunity to maybe transform the relationship with the consumer, maybe accelerate some processes that the automated system couldn't do. But it's definitely not about a revolution, right? It's about an evolution in working across these two worlds, the rules and tools that you've built, plus the agentic opportunity is, I think, what's going to be the biggest unlock. When it comes to the creation of these agents, you do have to think about this idea that you might have to deal with 100, thousands of agents being built. And so your ability to monitor, optimize, govern that is going to be kind of the make or break of your organization.
Bruno, I don't normally talk about vendors here on my podcast, but we have to talk about IBM because it's a lesson in history, not just the mention of a technology vendor. There was a great blog post that I think everyone should read. It's entitled From Checkers to Chess, A Brief History of IBM AI. And it talks about 70 years of research and involvement with AI, 7 decades. That fascinates me. I mean, they used chess and backgammon to train neural networks back in the 1950s. They built a speech recognition engine in 1962. I was born in 1960. They went on to develop natural language processing, image recognition, and programmed robotics to assemble typewriters. In 1992, they built an AI to compete in professional backgammon, and in 1997, Deep Blue beat the world champion chess player Garry Kasparov. Then comes Watson, right? Watson was released in 2004 on a room-sized computer with 10 racks, holding 90 servers, with a total of 2,880 processor cores. And of course, Watson won a live televised Jeopardy in 2011. 2019 was the year of the great debate, broadcast live on television and over the internet. Watson X was released in 2023, and now you are open sourcing IBM Granite models. I mean, this is history, Bruno. When I think about what IBM is doing with quantum computing alongside of that, I think that IBM might be poised to lead the way towards AGI, artificial general intelligence. Can you talk about the momentum that you're seeing in the future? I mean, is AGI coming, and what role is IBM playing there?
Well, I remember earlier in the conversation we were talking about one of the things that attracted me to IBM, and a lot of it is what you talked about here, right? This incredible deep research, thoughtful, long-term thinking on how these industry shifts are going to occur and how we navigate them to drive better value for I want to say companies, but also society and humanity. And so you're right. Earlier we said AI is new for the public, but it's been serious work for 70 years. When you look at the future, certainly the opportunity of quantum, what quantum is going to be able to do for security, for the ability to solve problems that we can't solve today just yet. I think we're really scratching the surface, and certainly one of the things that attracted me to the company is really this deep research, thoughtful approach to the technology innovation. While there's a lot of attraction, of course, to talking to the net new thing and net new age and so forth. I think IBM is the type of company that customers need to talk to if they think about whether they're going in the next 10, 20 years. And so certainly, it's difficult to predict the future. Like I said before, I will tell you there's something that people don't talk about, which is going to sound a little tactical, but I actually think is the ultimate unlock in what we're dealing with here. And this is something that's going to make you smile, because I think we've been talking about solving this for 20 years, is what I call semantic understanding. A lot of the organizations that I talk to, they talk about how far the agentic revolution might get them, but we keep going back to this thing that, yes, the data is important, but it's not sufficient. um, it is the semantic layer that sits on top of your data that I think is absolutely what's going to allow us to get to the next version of what we are today. I mean, I talked about PepsiCo earlier, right? 27,000 reports that they're taking into 50 AI-powered analytics console. I think if you listen to their video, they share this idea that a majority of these reports were not used. Just a few months ago, I was talking to a very large French company, and they're telling me, our users have built 20,000 dashboards. 18,000 of them are used by less than 8 users. And so why is that? It is because as you're thinking about an application that is useful, that is in fact driving value, if the basic semantic of it is not trusted, then everything falls apart. And so I think before we start getting excited about, the next level of intelligence, we ought to spend a little bit more time on the understanding of this data. And when you think that 99% of the data is untouched, we have a lot of work to do. And so I would say where it's valuable today is to think about long-term strategy, your alignment as an organization with the vendors you choose to work with. 2 is your architecture and your commitment to openness and this horizontal transversal strategy. It will make a huge difference. And then finally, don't be enamored by the hype. Think about your principles, right? And the first principle is understanding. A lot of what I do is for my kids. I know you talk a lot about your family as well. You and I have that in common and when I tell them to read, I don't tell them to read the book fast. I tell them to read to make sure they understand it. And I think we've not achieved that yet. And so before we think about the next phase, let's make sure we really understand what the data is saying.
I love it. I thought for sure you were going to tell me that AGI, it already exists somewhere in the IBM labs, and this was going to be the leak. It would have been super for the digital analyst to be the place where that happens. When it does, please call me and we'll do this again. Bruno, what a pleasure to get to spend some time with you. If I had my way, I would just do this with you every week. I love it. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. And it's always fun to talk to you. So absolutely, if you want to call me every week, you know where I am. So let's do this again.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much for joining The Digital Analyst. If you enjoyed today's podcast, do me a favor and like and subscribe, share this podcast. If you want to contact Bruno, best way to connect with him is probably going to be LinkedIn. You can find his bio at IBM. You can just do a search and you will find out all of the great things he's done. Definitely tune in to his CarCast podcast. Join the other 300,000 people that are there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to start a dialogue about AI and how you're using it and how we can potentially work together. Whatever you do, like and follow insightjam.com. The YouTube channel is where you'll find hundreds of other videos. They're in connection with Solutions Review. You can find them at solutionsreview.com. Glad to have you here. We will see you in a couple of weeks for The Digital Analyst.
Powered by Insight Jam.